Welcome back, or if it's your first time, I'm glad to have you here. I'm Matt Fendora, and you're tuned in to the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, where we journey together toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Using mind, body, heart, and spirit as the anchors of our podcast, join me as we set sail into the depths of self-discovery, unraveling the interconnected layers that shape our growth. If you resonate with today's conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. Your support means the world to us and ensures you never miss an empowering episode. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, a podcast all about being the best version of yourself through mind, body, heart, and spirit. Today, I am joined by Gennifer Robbins. Gennifer is a trauma-informed life coach who supports, encourages, and walks alongside those on their healing journey. She is the mother of 4 amazing sons, one of which has suffered from mental health disorders and a substance abuse disorder. This has led to a deep connection with the mental health and recovery community and has allowed her a newfound purpose in supporting families dealing with loved ones who have substance abuse disorders. Gennifer's proudest accomplishments include raising 4 incredible humans who are going out into the world on their own journeys, and becoming an ACC ICF coach and living her passion of supporting other people in their life journey. What makes her heart sing? Watching her children become amazing adults, partners, and fathers, and seeing how the power of growth can completely change a person's life if they choose to step into the hard work. Without further ado, here's Gennifer. How are you doing today, Gennifer?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Matt.
I'm really excited because this is something that I've heard, but I'm still very unfamiliar with. And I think a lot of people are as well. So I'm excited to get into it and start learning, what all of this is about and how we can work through that.
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
So my first question for you is, what is a trauma-informed life coach?
Yeah, so trauma-informed coaching really stems from the principles of, I think, trauma-informed care. For me, there's a whole cycle of understanding and ingraining that into my life, but we can get into that later. But really, there are 5 main components of trauma-informed care. And that's really around providing safety, whether that's physical safety or emotional safety, just a safe environment for the clients you're working with, that you're offering choice for them, that we're working in collaboration, that there's trust or trustworthiness within that. And a lot of that's really around providing clarity, consistency, and boundaries. Boundaries, something I work a lot on. So we will be talking a lot about that, I'm sure. And then the 5th element is around empowerment, and that is skill building. So really encouraging others that they have the ability to change and to grow, and regardless of what their past brings, they can always learn something new and be a different version of whatever that looks like for them. So for me, trauma-informed coaching then is really bringing to the table that deep understanding of how trauma affects people from their past, being cognizant of that, what the behaviors tend to look like, and creating that safe space where it's okay for them to acknowledge that there's trauma there and that we can move forward in a different way.
So on that, when you're helping people on their journey, do you feel like it's easier or it's more practical to do it one-on-one compared to a group setting, or does the group setting and support actually help people work through it and kind of break through that a little bit?
I think that depends on the individual person. It really does. Some people really feel a lot safer in a one-on-one environment. But I have found a lot of really great work comes out of group coaching and group work, where you have people who've experienced similar traumas that can come together and share what's worked for them. It's really kind of an empowering situation when you get a group of people together to work through that. So either one, it really depends on the client themselves.
Okay. So what can you share, how your journey started on becoming this trauma-informed life coach?
Yeah, so for that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning of my career. So I've been in healthcare for coming up on 29 years. And I started in nursing, bedside nurse for quite a few years, and what I call the helping profession. And if you're not watching, I'm using quotes around that, and we can kind of get into that a little bit. But I had this calling to be in this helping profession, and bedside nursing was the start of that for me. And then I realized, well, I think along the journey, from the time I was 16, I knew what I wanted to do. I had it set. I went into nursing basically because of that. But that was to be a certified nurse midwife. Went back to school, completed that journey, and realized really quickly that was not my path. and and I spent a long time then kind of, searching around, like, where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? How does it, how do I help people? What does this look like? And along that journey, I think a lot of things came to light where I was able to try new things. So I got into organizational development, which is where I really learned about coaching and one-on-one and how to walk alongside somebody. So I spent a long time working with leaders and developing, that work life. And this continual theme started coming up for me. And that was really around trauma. And because of my background, I knew trauma. I knew what trauma was. The physical sense, I guess. We're there to help with traumas, right? We're there to help support people in their times of need in the healthcare setting. However, I think there was, up until recently, maybe the past 10, 20 years, we didn't really look at traumas being from a mental capacity. We looked at physical traumas. If you looked fine, you were fine. Everything else was just in your head. So I think there was a lot of that bubbling up for me. And what I began to see was people go into a helping profession because they want to help people from their own past experiences. So usually they come in with a trauma that they're trying to heal from, or that they don't fully understand, but they want to save other people from experiencing that same trauma. So we see a lot of that in healthcare. And then what we end up seeing on the flip side of that is what I call a secondary trauma. And secondary trauma is when you have healthcare providers that are seeing horrible things on a daily basis. They're seeing people at their worst. They're seeing really horrible incidents. Coming out of the pandemic, we saw horrible, horrible things during that pandemic. So we have a lot of healthcare providers, frontline nurses, up to leadership, who are really, kind of experiencing that secondary trauma, and not really addressing it. So I think, we still have a long way to go in healthcare on that, but it's really hard to support other people, take care of other people when you're not taking care of yourself and when you don't understand some of that. So that kind of all started bubbling up for me when I got into coaching. And it was really when I was studying for my credentialing, my coaching credentialing through ICF, I ran into an author, Anne Lamott. I don't know if you're familiar with her at all. She's amazing, amazing work. But when I was reading her work, there was one quote that stuck with me, and it was one of those moments of my mind exploded, everything kind of came together. And that quote was, "Help is the sunny side of control." And I realized at that moment, I keep saying I'm helping people, but I'm only helping them to the capacity of what I want them to do. So when, and this happens in healthcare quite a bit, we think we have the answers. So we're not working collaboratively with people. We're just telling them what they need to do. And when they don't do it, we call them non-compliant. They're just not, they don't care about the work. They don't want to do it. They want to get healthy. So we make all these assumptions then. And that's where I had this realization of, oh my gosh, that's kind of what I've been doing. And probably to the detriment of a lot of people. So I really had to, kind of take a deep look at myself and my own history and my own traumas and be able to, kind of work through those myself so I don't bleed them onto other people. So I don't want to tell you what to do. I want to work in collaboration with you and create this safe environment so we can do this hard work together. So that's really how this kind of all came about. And just continuing that work forward in healthcare as much as I can is still a goal of mine as well. So kind of doing tandem roles here.
Mhm. So you, because you were doing this, you started this journey and you started focusing on what trauma is, and you were able to find that in yourself and work through that. For those who haven't had that opportunity to do the deep work, how do they recognize that they need to do that work?
Mm. You know, I think everybody comes to it at a little different point, Matt. And I think one of those ways is when you just get tired of the way things are. You want something different. You want to be a different person. You just can't quite get there. You don't know why. You don't know what's holding you back, or maybe you do know what's holding you back. Maybe you're fully aware, but you don't know how to work through that to get through to that person you want to be.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of ways that you can come to that, but usually it's that idea of, when it gets more uncomfortable to stay as I am, then I have to change. That's when people start reaching out typically.
So let's say you have a family member or a friend who has had this traumatic event in their life, and you
Mhm.
see it holding them back, and it's hurting you to, witness them dealing with all of that.
Mhm.
How can you help that individual, whether that's working through it, or like what can the caring individual do to support that person?
Mm. For me, when I see that happening, and this is just kind of the nature of who I am anyhow. This is not part of my coaching business necessarily, just as a friend or, a colleague or whatever. It's me just saying, what can I do for you? How can I support you? I can see you're struggling. Do you just need somebody to talk to? I'm going to tell you, listening is the key to connecting with people. Sometimes people just need to vent, they need to get it out, they need to share their story. Um, this is one of the key pieces in the mental health field, and that battle that we're struggling with right now is people feel so alone because there's still such a stigma around this. So we have a lot of people that are suffering in silence. And I think if you see it and you recognize it, don't be afraid to ask what you can do to support them. People are really wanting to talk about things.
Hmm. What if they're really, really stubborn in the sense they don't want to talk about it? They just put a lid
Mhm,
on it. It's Pandora's box. They sit on the box and you're not allowed to
mhm,
even look at the box. How
mhm.
can we help those individuals?
I think it depends on what capacity you're trying to help, because if they're coming to you saying, I need help, but I'm not willing to look at this, well, then we can have some different conversations. But if it's just somebody that you recognize is going through something, and they don't feel like they can share that, that's where I don't try to control it anymore. That's yours to own and deal with as you want to. And that's where I've had to set up that boundary for myself, because I want to help people. I just, okay, let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's fix it. That's not how it works.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to recognize not to feel guilty that you can't help that person too, because you're going to feel
So,
that guilt and
mm-hmm,
it's not your fault. They're
mm-hmm,
unfortunately, like I'm the same way. Like I want to help everybody,
mm-hmm,
but there
mm-hmm.
are some times where you just can't help somebody and you can't force yourself to help them or force them to allow you to help
Yeah.
them.
And you have to remember that everybody's on their own journey, right?
Mhm.
So because you see something and recognize something, it's probably because you've had experience with that. That's not necessarily where they are in their journey. And maybe they are still at a point where they need to separate themselves from it because it's way too traumatic. So just eventually they'll get there and they'll be ready at some point, maybe, but that's not for you to own. And that's one more thing. I think that as we talk about boundaries and you're building boundaries around yourself, that you don't want to have to carry for somebody else, right? That's a pretty heavy burden of you carrying the weight of somebody else, of fixing somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a technique that helps people recognize that trauma that they've had? Maybe they know that maybe there's something off, or or maybe they don't. Is there something that you can do, say, ask, whatever that is, that helps them make that recognition of, oh, there is this one thing and I didn't realize it was affecting me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that looks a lot of different ways too, Matt. Sometimes it's just saying, "Hey, I noticed something shift in you when you started talking about that.
Mm.
What happened there? What was that? And is there a connection? Can you connect that to anything?" So it's really getting them to recognize when something has changed or when they're sharing something and they don't know why it's affecting them the way it is. So it's kind of that diving deeper into that coaching mindset of, how do we get down to the root cause? I don't want to fix that root cause. I want to help you move forward through that. But how do we at least recognize there's a connection there? We've got something here that's holding you back. And what is that? So sometimes it's really, I think that intentional listening and being able to kind of spot when something has changed. For me, it's a lot about behaviors. So when I hear how a behavior is holding you back, do you recognize that behavior? Do you know you're doing it? Is there an awareness around that behavior? Why do you do that behavior? Do you know? Um, what does that behavior serve for you? Because there is a point where we have to acknowledge that our behaviors are here for something to protect us. They're here for some good reason. And we have to acknowledge that and really appreciate that part of ourselves, even if it's a behavior we don't like. It's just a behavior that may not be serving us anymore, but it served us really well for a while.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just acknowledging that that behavior even exists and being able to call that out or recognize it and help them see that.
Mm. Can you discuss the importance of trauma-informed care in supporting individuals and families affected by mental health disorders and substance abuse?
I think this is everything. Trauma-informed care is so incredibly important when you're dealing with families or loved ones because they are in crisis right now. Those tend to be a lot of the people that I walk alongside. They are in crisis right now. So you have to understand the point of trauma that they're coming from, what they're dealing with right now. And when I say that, it's typically, the mental health world, and I love my healthcare world, don't get me wrong. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to mental health and substance abuse disorder. Because we don't have enough resources in place, there's a heavy stigma within healthcare around both of these pieces. It's getting better, but we still have a long way to go. So understanding that they are in crisis right now, they are trying to find people that understand what they're going through. They're trying to find the right resources. They may not have money to deal with those resources when they find them. There's just so much here. So understanding that what they're dealing with right now is the most important thing. And then understanding that things that I say when I want to help, again, I'm using quotes, when I want to help, might be re-traumatizing.
Mm.
So I pick my words very carefully when I'm working with them. and really try to create this safe space where they can just let it all out, just share, just, have somebody who understands what they're walking through and be able to create a plan. So it's really important in that field, in that space, that we get them out of reactionary mode and we get them somewhat healing themselves in order to be more proactive. So if they're dealing with a loved one in the midst of a crisis, it's really hard when you're in the middle of the fire with them to put it out. You have to step back and be able to think a little more proactively to create a plan.
Mm-hmm.
So that trauma-informed piece is so critical in this work that we're doing on the mental health aspect.
So you mentioned that one of your sons suffered from a mental health disorder and a substance abuse disorder.
Yes.
As a mother, how did that impact you?
It is devastating. There is nothing less than devastation that I can use to describe it. And just a little bit about that journey. And by the way, I did ask him if he was okay sharing this. He enjoys sharing his story as well, so he's very happy with me to share it. Because we're still in the middle of it. Like, it doesn't ever just go away. We still deal with it on a daily basis. So this actually started in 2021. My ex-husband, the father of my three oldest children, passed away from a long-term substance abuse issue. So that kind of started it for us. That at the time, my son was 15 and was really just trying to understand, trying his best to deal with it. Mind you, this is right after pandemic era too, so we've got all that we're dealing with. And he just didn't know how to deal with it, and that's kind of what led to trial and error and using substances, and then bam, here we are with a full-fledged substance abuse disorder. So we've spent the last few years really trying to find him the right help and support. So when I'm working with people, I know exactly what they're going through because we've been through it. We're walking down the same path. I totally understand where they are. As a parent, it's completely devastating because all you do at the time is look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong? How did I miss this? Oh my gosh, this
Mm-hmm.
is just completely devastating. And this is my kid. And also you have that complexity of, I don't know how to separate myself from my child yet, so I'm going to do everything I can to help you, because that's what we do as parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no book that tells us exactly how to parent and how to parent each child. So we're kind of, just doing this experiment anyhow to see what works. But I'm so ingrained in taking care of my kids and meeting all their needs. How do I now step back and let them start doing some of this work on their own when you're in the middle of this crisis? So it's incredibly challenging for parents to be able to separate themselves from their child, even if it's an adult child. We get very ingrained in supporting, like we start paying bills, we start, I don't want to see you on the street, so here's all the food, or here's all the money you need. And really what we're doing is setting them up for more failure.
Mm-hmm.
So as a parent, it's just devastating. It wrecks your whole world and your idea of, who you thought you had as children, or who you thought you were as a parent. But it's also, I tell this to people a lot. I wouldn't change this journey for anything. This has been, I'm really grateful to be his parent right now, as we're going through this together, because the amount of growth and learning we have gone through together has just been incredible. And I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if we hadn't gone through this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really, I try to have an attitude of gratitude, and I try to be really, really positive about what we're experiencing. Is it hard? Yes. Is it good work? Yes. And now we can take that out into the world and walk alongside other people as they're on this journey too.
How did you separate yourself in that instance from your son?
It's a long, hard process. It really is. But I think part of that work is really the boundary work. So it's, who do I want to be? Because I cannot be this reactionary person and work with you and help you get on your feet. I can't do both. And literally it was starting to kill me, Matt. I mean, it was just taking a toll on me physically, mentally, emotionally. It was all I ever thought about. It was just that hard circumstance that you're in as a parent in the middle of it. And then you have to realize that there are parts of this that I have to own. My part is taking care of me, creating the boundaries that are good for me and healthy for me. And that meant I had to start taking care of myself. As simple as making sure I was drinking water and eating the right foods, making sure I was at least walking or getting some form of exercise every day. Even if it was hard to get out of bed, I had to force myself to do those things because I knew that's what was going to be part of the healing process for me. And then there's also this may be one of the hardest things, but it's that separation of my child has choices in their life. And those choices may not be my choices, and they may not be what I would choose for them to do. But he has a right to choose what that is. How do I then protect myself while he makes his choices? So there were a lot of conversations between the two of us around what that looks like, and me saying, okay, I'm here to support you, but but I cannot be a part of that. So a lot of those conversations that we had.
How can we set up these boundaries?
Mm. You know, it's really interesting. There was a point in my life I didn't grow up learning about boundaries. I didn't. As a matter of fact, I probably learned the opposite of boundaries. So getting to the point where I understood how important, first of all, what boundaries were, and then how important they actually are. What I see is that some people are naturally good at them. They've had really good support in their with the parents that they had or the community that they had, so they learned how to do that. So I started kind of modeling some of what I was seeing looked like good boundaries. But I think it's really just understanding, um, not having boundaries is actually a trauma response. It's a people pleasing response. And when I understood that, I thought, oh gosh, okay, this is what true self-care looks like. It is really, I've got to set some, first of all, I've got to set some internal boundaries and I've got to set some external boundaries. And those differences really are internal. They're for me. They're the boundaries I have to stick to. So, I've got to get out of bed every day and go to work. I've got to take care of myself. I've got to do what I say I'm going to do. I've got to be true to my word. I've got to be disciplined. Those are my internal boundaries. External boundaries are what I will tolerate from other people. And what I think people don't understand about boundaries is a lot of people think a boundary is what I put on somebody else. If you don't do this, then I'm not going to do this. That's not a boundary. That's a control mechanism. So a boundary is I'm not going to tolerate that kind of language, or I'm not going to tolerate you speaking to me that way. So if you do, what I'm going to do is walk away. And I'm going to give us some time to think about this, and then we'll come back. So that's a boundary. It's not you don't get to speak that way. You can talk however you want, but I don't have to stay here and listen to it. Right. So there's a difference. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that difference. They use it, and especially in the world of mental health, we try to use it to control somebody else. If you're not going to take your medicine, if you're not going to go to therapy, I'm not going to help you anymore. That's really just a mechanism of control. So I think there are better ways to set up boundaries, but it's a learning process. It really is.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because that one of those examples was exactly what I dealt with yesterday, and setting up that boundary of, hey, you can't talk to me like, if you're going to talk to me like this, I'm going to walk away. And it's
Yeah.
important to recognize that person isn't
Mhm.
necessarily going to take it as, oh, okay, yeah, sure.
No.
They could absolutely be defensive. Like, who do you think you are setting a
Right.
boundary saying that I
Right.
can't talk to you
Mhm.
like this? But
Mhm.
the conversation still has to happen, and it's
It does.
going to be uncomfortable. A lot of people don't like that confrontation, but it
Mhm.
has to get done.
Mhm. First of all, kudos to you because it is hard having those conversations.
Mhm.
But they're so important because that's you protecting you, right? And and you're right. If you have been somebody who has never set boundaries before, people are going to push back on your boundaries. It is going to be full on um, like war. It's going to feel like you're in the middle of war because they are used to trampling all over your boundaries. And they're used to you not having any and you being there whenever they need to vent and share whatever they need to share. Um, so when you start setting those up, just be prepared. And I usually tell people, be prepared for that. It can get rough. Hold your ground because this is you doing it for you.
Mhm. And then to your point earlier, you mentioned if you don't have boundaries, that means you're a people pleaser and you're dealing with that trauma. And looking
Mm,
back and realizing before and as I was getting married, I realized I didn't have boundaries. I didn't have anything, everything
mm,
was just open air and
mhm.
whatnot. And looking back, it kind of makes sense because I know both my parents dealt with things, and instead of dealing with it, it got pushed onto us. And so
Yes.
everybody else thought it's okay not to have boundaries, and well, why are you acting this way, like you can't set up a boundary on me.
Mm,
And that makes it even more difficult to set up those boundaries because the people you're supposed to trust, you're supposed to love, and they're supposed to be closest to you are saying you can't set up a boundary or that's not okay.
yeah. Well, and when you heard that from your parents, of course you would think that you don't know any better. You don't know any differently. So if your parents didn't have boundaries, you more than likely did not learn anything about boundaries. You don't even know what it looks like. But my guess is if you came from a family like that, your people pleasing was just to try and keep everybody happy and keep the peace in the house. That's a lot of what probably you felt like your job was. So learning how to set boundaries, actually, for a lot of people who have that people pleasing mechanism, learning to set boundaries almost physically hurts. It's very hard because you're trying to keep the peace. You're still stuck in that mode. And it's just a really hard thing to say, no, I got to put myself first now.
Hmm. It is a difficult thing but a
Mhm.
necessary thing.
It is. It really is. Because you're worth it.
So, other than setting up boundaries, is there any other strategies or approaches that you use to help individuals navigate the trauma recovery and healing?
Yeah, so it usually starts with boundaries. I think I shared a little bit earlier that gratitude is one of my go-tos. And when you're in the midst of something so heavy and like and you're in crisis, it's hard to find gratitude. But it really is a practice that if you utilize every day, just pick five things that you are grateful for today. Um, I try to encourage people to do some kind of exercise. If they can't do much, that's okay. You're exhausted. I get it. Try and at least go for a walk. Maybe it's just a 10-minute walk. I don't care. But on that walk, try to look around you. You're grounding yourself. You're looking around at what's in front of you. You're in the present moment. So when you're in that moment, you can find things to be grateful for. If it's just the sun is shining, which we're all grateful for in this moment, but
Mm.
the sun is shining. I'm grateful for that. It really changes the mechanisms of how you look at things, of how you view the world. It changes your perception. even if just for that short time. And then it starts extending out more and more and more. So the more you utilize the skill, the easier it becomes, and you're able to kind of push that into things that you really aren't grateful for, but you can find grateful things within them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude is another one. Exercise, really, in all honesty, it depends on where that person is in the moment. So if you're early on in this recovery phase, or and I say recovery for the families of loved ones dealing with people with mental health disorders, that's a recovery process too. So if you're in the early stages of recovery for yourself, it's really what am I noticing about myself? What are things, where do I, first of all, where do I want to be? What do I want that outcome to look like? How do I want to present to the world? So in regular coaching, we talk about this. We talk about this in recovery too. Where do I want to be? What does that look like? However, it may just be starting as simple as, okay, I'm going to walk away this week and I'm going to just try to have awareness about how I feel in a certain moment. Let's start really simple. It's an awareness moment. It's noticing things. And then we'll build into, okay, you're noticing that. What do you want to do with that? Where do you want to go with it? How do you want to hold that? How do you want to let it go? What does that look like? So it's all these inquiry pieces that that they can start to co-create with you once they notice those things. And a lot of what I deal with other people is dissociation of some sort, right? So it's too heavy. I can't deal with it. Um, I'm gonna get on Netflix and just gonna chill and watch all the Netflix and not even think about it. I'm gonna doom scroll, right? I'm gonna get on social media. You know what? Maybe it's overeating. Maybe it could be anything. We all have these mechanisms that help us dissociate. Again, I try to tell people, remember to be grateful for that, because it's your body telling you you're overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed and your body's trying to help save you and conserve some of that energy. However, notice what's coming up for you when you get to that point. Why are you there? Do you need to sleep? Do you need to eat? What do you need in that moment? What is your body telling you need? So let's just be aware of that for the moment. And then when we start having some of those noticing pieces, next week we'll come back and we'll work on what you can do with that then. Where do you want to go with that? But let's try and be grateful for it and just notice it in the moment. So those are some big first steps. And then it just depends on where they are in that process and where we go with it. But I try to present a toolbox for them to use. You can't use a hammer to solve all of your problems in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need multiple tools. So what's going to work for one person may not work for another person, but let's try something out. Let's try some of these little pieces out, things that you can do right now that are tangible for you.
Mm-hmm. And I think the idea, the awareness is it's so simple, but it works. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the same thing, speaking of yesterday, I think because there was a little bit of awareness in there, I was able to not necessarily get into it, but I was able to kind of hold my ground in what was going on.
That's
And
beautiful.
for whatever reason, there was this one phrase of a podcast that I was listening to yesterday that kind of reminded me and kind of got me through it. And it was, I don't know if you listen to the Mel Robbins podcast,
Yeah,
um,
love
but
her.
it was her point of saying it's not that deep.
Yeah.
And so when I said that, I'm like, yes, it's not that bad. Whatever this is, it's not that bad. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
something you can just get through. And because I had the awareness to remember that, I was able to get through that moment without getting too worked up and too hurt over everything that was happening.
Yeah. And I think that's also a reminder that your feelings are there to inform you of something. So that's telling you you need to set this boundary, right? Whatever that conversation was about, you need to start setting a boundary around that. So your feelings are telling you that something's off, but you also don't have to listen to every feeling. And you don't have to respond to every feeling. So that feeling, that secondary feeling that you get then is, oh, I want to shut this down. I don't want to have that conversation. I'm not that person. I'm here to make people happy. I'm here to help solve problems. I am not that person that's going to push back. So you don't have to listen to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to find that courage then to have those conversations. That's a different feeling. And that doesn't feel good to those of us who have had more of that people pleasing behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So it really isn't that deep. And yet it kind of is, because that's a big skill set for you to walk away with.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a success story that you've had with a client or with yourself?
Sure. With myself, I'm a continual learner. So every day is something new, and we grow every day, and I like to be open to that. I would say that with all of these pieces that I talk about and that I share with other people, I've experienced all of them. So I understand where you are, and I understand what that looks like and how hard it can be to do this work. Um, Yet I'm here thriving for the most part, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
can get there. We can do this hard work, and yet tomorrow may be another hard day. That's okay. Life goes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, I think I've had some really great successes with some clients. One of the most recent ones is somebody that I've been working with who just had a mom. I'm going to be very careful not to share too much information. I try to
Mm-hmm.
hold that privacy for them as much as possible. Just found out her son has an adult son has a substance abuse disorder. They just recognized it, starting to work through it. Um, every time she was coming in for a session, you could just feel it. It was just this full on reactionary crying the whole time, just obviously just so heightened in emotions, which is how we feel in that moment. Exactly. Um, and as we worked through these processes, setting boundaries, what do those look like? What do you want to do with that? How does that look for you? Giving her choice, because in that moment, you don't feel like you have much choice as a parent. You're kind of, you just feel stuck. So giving her choice and letting her kind of create what that looked like. And I remember the first time she said to me, I think I need to cut off contact with him for a little while. And what does that look like for you? I just need to block his calls because he was like her go-to for everything. So he would be in the middle of the night, he'd be having a moment and he would call mom and mom would answer the phone. And for her to say that was huge.
Yeah.
And gosh, it was probably 2 weeks later, she came back, we got back together, and she looks a little bit lighter. Her eyes are bright again, and you kind of see that spark. And I'm like, what happened? How's that going? And she said, I decided it was going so well, I needed to not have contact. So I've continued that. So she said it for just a week, and it ended up going on for a couple of weeks, maybe even up to a month. And a lot of that was because her son couldn't speak nicely to her when he was using. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was really hurtful. Um, and she fully understood what was happening, but at the same time, it's hurting and devastating. And so then she started setting up other boundaries. So we worked through that one. That worked nicely. Then she could start having a little bit of contact with him only if he was going to be respectful. He soon got on board and started, being a little respectful. And then there were lots of other boundaries that she set, a lot of it around money and a lot of it around how they were viewing help of him and helping him. Um, and long story short, he ended up asking for help, finally recognized that there was a problem, and is actually currently in treatment right now. So
Mm.
a lot of really healthy things. But for me, it was seeing the light come back in her eyes, that she felt like she could breathe again. She was sleeping. She was thinking a little more clearly, and she was able to be proactive then instead of in the middle of that fire all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a huge success. Is it over? No, but it's one step, one day, and that's how we look at it. So that was a huge success. I
Absolutely.
did just have somebody reach out to me too that I worked with a few years ago, and it was in a group setting. And one of the things you asked about group, and I think there's so much healing that can happen in community and in
Mm-hmm.
group. And this was just a really amazing group of women that we kind of walked through some past traumas together, and how we wanted to move forward. And she just randomly reached out to me and said, "Man, I've been working on this breath work that we talked about and that we worked through." And she has a very stressful job, very stressful leadership position. She was like, "You wouldn't believe how much it's helping me. I want to learn more now. Can we do more?" So that to me is just so exciting when you start seeing the fruit of your labor. Because Matt, this work is hard. It is
Mm-hmm.
hard work. Anytime you decide you're going to work on yourself, um, it's not easy. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why we see, traumas perpetuate from one person to another. The statement, hurt people,
Mm-hmm.
because we're so hurt, we're just bleeding on to other people and we don't even know we're doing it. And really, it's because this work is hard, and it takes a lot of courage to dive into it and to really do it. So um, for me to see people willing to jump in even more and dig into that, gosh, that's why I do what I do. I just love it. I love it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to make this transition to another way in which you help people. And that's something we did not mention in your bio for whatever reason. I don't know. I forgot to put it on there as well. But you're the president of the Respect Team. And so could you explain A, what is the Respect Team? And B, how do you operate as the president of the Respect Team?
Great. So the Respect Team, let's start with that, is a nonprofit organization that has a curriculum. We have speakers take take that curriculum into middle schools and high schools in our local community, where we teach kids, young adults, about how to respect themselves, how to respect others. That encompasses a lot of material, right? And and there's this opening that happens where conversations just start naturally bubbling up. And these conversations can be really challenging and hard. Teenagers are going through a lot right now. And not that they always haven't, but there's a lot going on for them right now. So to have a safe space to bring up some of these conversations is a really impactful spot that I think we are able to kind of dive into, and help these kids learn some of these skill sets early. Um, and for example, we've had conversations around nutrition, how to take care of yourself, what that looks like. But conversations around that have just come up, not because we started them, but around domestic abuse, around mental health disorders, around substance use. These all tend to bubble up in these safe places because that's what kids are experiencing, and they need somebody to talk about it with. So we tend to kind of lean into that. Not that we have the answers, not that we're therapists when we go in. We're just a safe adult having some really good conversations with these students. So being the president of the board, I started serving on the board about 4 years ago, and took on the presidency about it's been about a year now. That has looked it has looked very different over the time I have started this journey with the Respect Team. We went through a pretty major transition last year, which has been wonderful. Change and transitions are hard, but it's been a wonderful blessing for our organization. We have a new executive director who came in the middle of last year, around June. And the prior executive director that we had was also the founder. So she carried everything and just knew it. She built it. She knew it inside and out. Like, she was just brilliant at what she did. And the board was more acting as a supportive capacity. So when we knew that we were going to need a new executive director, we had to do some shifting and changing in restructuring of the way that we utilize the board. And we knew that it couldn't all fall on this new executive director anymore. It had to be a shared governance style. So as the board president, it was me really walking alongside the exiting ED and the new ED, or we had an interim for a while too. So walking alongside each of them, trying to create this new strategy for who we were as not necessarily the face of RespectTeam, but how we supported and how we really wanted to grow the RespectTeam. So we're still in the midst of that. It's a lot of fun and a lot of hard work.
So we just had Teen Speak, which
Mhm.
was phenomenal.
It really
Um,
was.
what is next? What's coming next for the Respect Team?
So a couple of things we have on our plate. We are always working on grants and funding. That is, that's probably the basis for any nonprofit. But how do we get more? What does that look like? How do we then expand out to where we want to be? So really, one of the things we want to do, because we recognize when we go into schools that we can stir up some hard conversations, and the schools don't necessarily have the resources to support us when we leave. So one of the things we would really like to do and are working towards is getting our own therapist on staff, getting a counselor on board, so then we can have a follow-up as well. Like, hey, come, okay, partner with us. You've got this going on. We want to ensure that you have the care that you need and the support that you need. So that's something that's a priority for us over the next year, is getting funding and getting a counselor in to work with us. Next, after that, and we're starting to work on this now, is our gala event. This is our one of our big fundraising events that happens in the fall. And we're, again, just getting started on the planning for that. But it's always a fun event where we get to recognize, again, the work that we do is all about students and the work that they are doing. And let me tell you, we have some really incredible students and kids in our community. Those of you that think that kids these days are not getting it, you're missing out. So I would encourage you to come to our gala or to the Teen Speak next year, because you're going to see some really incredible kids doing a lot of really good work. For example, last year at our gala event, we got to recognize a couple of finalists who are actually building their own nonprofits as we speak. It's incredible. I mean, the work that's happening by these kids is just, it's incredible. So it's really great to get to celebrate them and celebrate some of our schools that we work with. So it's such a great event. It's a lot of fun. And then after that, we already have our sights on next year's Teen Speak. So Teen Speak is very similar to what I consider like a TEDx, where we have a group of kids and they'll get up one at a time and they'll share their story. And it is an impactful story. They get the opportunity because these are not kids that are in debate. They don't have this background of public speaking. They are just normal kids who are terrified to get up on stage, and they work with the coach. They refine themselves, and they do it. The amount of courage that they have is just, it's incredible. It blows me away every year. So we're looking at how we can actually expand that and get that into schools next year, as opposed to being an event where people come. We want to actually get it into schools next year, so more kids can see this and see the opportunity and hear the stories of their peers, hear what they're going through. And, that creates a whole culture of empathy and compassion. And we all know we need more of that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just really so exciting, the work that we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. In reference to looking for the therapist, is that or the counselor, is that somebody you would want to have in person that would go through schools, or is that somebody you can use from, let's say, a different state or an outside source?
I don't know that we've gotten that far yet. I think we know we want this, and we know we have to figure out how to fund this. What that really looks like operationally, I don't know that we've totally figured out. But I think there are a lot of opportunities to look at both ways of doing that.
Okay. So now that we are getting near the end of the podcast, I have 3 questions in which I ask all guests. And these questions are over the topics of what this podcast is, which is live, love, and grow.
Mhm.
So the first question I have for you is, what advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
I'm a so my coaching group is called Veritable Coaching Group. Um, I am the word veritable actually has a couple of different meanings, but really it's kind of another word for authentic. So I'm really big on presenting yourself in an authentic manner, and just being true to who you are, because I think that's how we build more connection with people, and how we start to make an impact. When we start supporting other people or working alongside community, we start creating this like happiness, this joy, and it really does go full circle, right? So I think presenting your authentic self. um, I would say a lot of people have work to do to understand their authentic self, though. That's a different podcast. um, but presenting that authentic self and sharing your story. So, one of my biggest uh, pushes right now for myself and for other people as we're going through this, this mental health battle and this substance abuse world, because it's just 70% of people are coming from some form of trauma. Okay, let's stop shoving that down. Let's start sharing our story, because when we share our story, we make those connections. And I'll tell you, I probably started really living truly to this about 15 years ago. And I have met the most amazing people just by sharing my story. And the stories look different at different times. So just by sharing that story, some of these people are now my lifelong friends.
Mhm.
Um, so you just make these connections with people. You start changing lives. It makes a huge difference.
My second question is, what are some practical ways people can cultivate self-love?
So, practically speaking, self love is not um, eating chocolates and taking bubble baths. I know that's not what people want to hear. Self love is doing the hard work. It's being disciplined. It's being true to yourself, and really um, starting to believe in yourself, I guess, is what I would like to say. It's holding yourself accountable to certain actions. It's getting out and exercising. It's taking care of your mental health. It's eating well. It's all of the things we know to do, but we don't necessarily do. So it's building those healthy habits. And that's a huge piece to keeping yourself healthy. That's true self-love. It's being able to use your voice and set boundaries. It's having courage. Like, those are all really big self-love pieces.
Mhm.
And it's also being compassionate with yourself.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of times we talk about we talk about people who are maybe depressed, or, I talked about dissociation earlier. There are other trauma responses, which are um, those that are almost hyper vigilant, those that are working so hard to be a better person. Those can be trauma responses too. Like, you never give yourself a break. You've got to be perfect. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. Just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And you're never letting yourself pause enough to actually make changes and even ask yourself if this is what's making you happy. So we can look at it from both sides, right? But in all of those, there's this component of perfectionism. And another thing I love to talk about is failure,
Mm.
because we don't like it. It's a bad word. It's another F word. We don't want it. We don't want any part of it. However, this is how you learn and grow. Like,
Mm-hmm.
failure is good.
Mm-hmm.
And until we have a healthy understanding of what failure is, we're going to continue to see it as something bad, or other people judging us because we failed. That's part of sharing your story too. That's part of breaking down the stigmas. It's owning failures
Mm-hmm.
and learning and getting up and growing again. And then you have resilience. So there's this whole, conglomerate that kind of goes along together as you're doing this work. But that's self-love. And
Mm-hmm.
that self-compassion comes in. Man, I failed on that. I fell down on my face hard, but okay, I'm human. Okay, it happens. And I'm going to get up and I'm going to do it again differently next time.
Mm-hmm. My final question is, what is one actionable tip someone can do today to grow 1% better?
I would say really having, okay, this is probably one of my biggest pet peeves. You didn't ask me, but I'm going to share it. It's people who are not self-aware. So I think, um, and I think we're seeing this more and more, or even socially aware. So I think the two kind of go hand in hand. But when we're talking about people that are not self-aware, they may not know how they're coming across, or I mean, they don't see it. They don't know what the perception is of them. Um, there's so many examples I could give, but it's just not having a self-awareness. So making yourself 1% better would be pausing and saying, who am I really? What can I bring to my awareness now? Because we have a lot of unconscious biases that happen. We have a lot of unconscious habits that happen. Even when we're talking about people pleasing, why am I a people pleaser? Why do I feel like I need to do that? Why do I feel like I can't stand up for myself? Just get curious about yourself. Ask yourself all these questions. So then you can start to make a change if that's what you want to do. It's a choice then. But if it's not in your awareness, if you're not even aware of how you are acting or how you're coming across to other people, there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my big takeaway.
Okay.
Notice yourself, notice how you are, and start to have awareness about that.
So, how can people connect with you?
Mm. Um, so I have a website, but it's under construction right now. So more to come on that. Hopefully it'll be up and going by April 1st. Really, you can connect with me on Facebook, Gennifer Robbins. I also have Instagram, Veritable Coaching Group on Instagram. Um, or you can email me directly, which is Gennifer, and it's Gennifer with a G, Gennifer .robbins@yahoo.com. So happy to reach out and talk to people anytime. But hopefully that website will be up soon.
Hopefully. And how can people support you on your journey?
That's a great question. See, this is my problem. I don't like asking for help and support, right? Really, um, I think it goes back to how you move this work forward. So it's how you can support me by, reaching out, asking how you can get yourself better, or let's set up some coaching sessions. That's great. but how do you move this work forward? And that's by you doing the work and pushing it forward to somebody else. How can you help support somebody else and walk alongside somebody else? That's where this work really gets done.
Awesome. Well, Gennifer, I'm really glad that we had this conversation. I know I learned a lot. This is, I'd say, maybe a little bit longer than most episodes, but there's so much value in everything that was saying. We didn't just, run our mouths to run our mouths. Like there was an actual conversation and there was a lot to learn. And I really hope that somebody takes something away from today and I think that's going to happen.
Me too. I'm hopeful. And thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you for having me on and for stepping into your courage by hosting a podcast. I mean, this is huge. So I'm glad we got to connect on it.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast. I hope you took something away from this episode that you can implement today, just like I did. If you've been listening to the podcast this month, you know that today I'm supposed to announce the winners of the Amazon gift card giveaway. Unfortunately, there were no participants in the giveaway, so I can't announce it. I'll have to come up with a better way to give back to you guys in the future. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. I have a lot of great guests scheduled for May that focuses on mental health. During the month of May, I will be providing free resources to help improve our mental health. You won't want to miss these episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, the ones before, and or you're looking forward to future episodes, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It helps me get this information to even more people. No matter what you choose to do, choose to live, love, and grow. Thank you, and have an outstanding day.